Welcome to Tell the Damn Story, the show that explores the many ways to navigate the successes and failures that aspiring and struggling writers face to make your journey that much easier.
Hey, Alex Simmons, we're here again at Tell the Damn Story, episode 5692.
Something like that.
Yeah, so how are you doing, Alex? What's going on?
What's going on? Well, life, liberty, and the pursuits of creativity is what's going on. We got all kinds of good stuff to talk about today. One of them being yourself and the accomplishments, magnificent Mondo accomplishments that you have pulled off in just these past few months.
Oh, yes. It was a lot of experience, a lot of work, but the 6th volume of Soul Scream Anthology called Annihilation is set to be published on July 31st. The first 5 are already out, and to celebrate and prepare people for this 6th and possibly final, we'll see, volume, what we have done is we have taken the price for the first 5 volumes and we threw them down through the cellar.
You lost your damn mind is what you did.
All the way. We did. We are having a Soul Scream summer with prices scorchingly low. Check this out. From today until July 31st, you can get Soul Scream, all first 5 volumes. Each one has an ebook for $1.99 or less, and in print, $5.99 or less. We put the prices so low that snobs will be like, "Oh, those books must not be any good." And hell with them. They don't get to, they're not in the know, so hell with them. But those of you who know that you can get for just a pittance of a price.
I'm sorry, what was that?
A pittance
of
a price. You can get a whole summer's worth of reading. Over 30 award-winning and some up-and-coming authors doing short
genre?
stories. It's hybrid horror. So sometimes it's holiday and horror. Sometimes there's a lot of female protagonists. Then there's dark justice. There's monstrous humans, monstrous hearts, and there's sci-fi runs amok. All 5 of those are on sale. And those first 5, you can read them and then give them to a niece or nephew, like maybe 13 older or 12 or 13 or older, because they're about as violent or as scary as like Stephen King Night Shift, right? So it's about a PG-13, maybe a soft R. All 5 volumes. Annihilation, it's a little more adult, but that'll come out July 31st. So
there you go.
That's what's going.
So for the next 19 days
or
you
so,
can get these things at a rock bottom, silly price. Yes,
ridiculous price.
Okay.
So there you go.
And just out of curiosity, what's the size of the average book?
Like the first one is just a teaser. That's why it's the lowest of the prices. It's 99 cents and that kind of thing. But most of them are about 150 to 230 pages.
We're not talking a pamphlet of like 20 pages here. This
bro. No. They look like that one over there, bro.
There you go. So there you go.
Yeah, and a lot of fun, different themes, and we have the office staff are characters that show up in some of the short stories throughout, and their story builds as well. So there's a ton of fun. And
absolutely. Well done. Well done.
So there you go. Have a great summer with Soul Scream Summer.
And speaking of, because we don't normally do this, speaking of Goodreads, aside from your softer or even just PG-13 horror fix, you can also get, because we talked about this last week, we had a wonderful guest on last week named Felicity Green, who also is an author of a number of volumes of work, a series that she has, a witchcraft series that she has. And Felicity writes what are called cozy mysteries. And Felicity was on, I believe one of them is No Rest for the Wicked Witch. is one of them. She's got several other titles, The Witch Club, which is the series title, and Herb Witch for Hire. And they're mystery series in Scotland and England. So it's a lot of background and everything. So we had her on last week. She talked and shared a lot of her insight and her process and how she comes up with these ideas and what's influenced her and moved forward. So that was exciting. So that's paranormal, right? Then you've got Soul Scream, which is again PG-13 to soft
hybrid horror. It's a whole bunch
hybrid
of
horror,
it's
right?
a wide mix of things. We
So
even have some young upstart author named Alex Simmons.
Young upstart authors. Yes, try saying that 6 times fast. So we got cozy mysteries, hybrid horror, and then coming up this week, we interviewed a wonderful author named James Aquilone. Is that how his name is pronounced?
Aquilone, yeah.
Aquilone. And what is James known for, sir?
It's been amazing over the last, I'd say, 2.5, maybe 3 years. He's exploded. He is a managing editor at Weird Tales magazine, which he helped do. I don't know if I have it right here, but oh yes, I do. Oh God, this may cause things to fall.
Oh, that fun and excitement. Oh,
sorry, buddy. It's okay, buddy. He helped edit or managing editor, Weird Tales, 100 Years of Weird. This is an amazing collection of classic weird and horror fiction, supernatural and all that stuff from the last 100 years of Weird Tales. And then he's progressed from there. He's got a character called Dead Jack. I think he's got 3 novels from Dead Jack.
Yeah, I know you
have Blackjack, but that's not the same guy. He has Dead Jack, who is a zombie detective. And then he did Monsters Unleashed. It was like the classic Universal monsters. And a ton of great authors told new stories of the classic monsters.
Which is Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Mummy.
There might be a Lagoon type guy. We can't use his actual name. Invisible something.
Lagoon.
You know what I'm saying?
Right. The man who cannot be seen.
That's right. And the thing with that is he went on Kickstarter for that. He did a Kickstarter for Dead Jack and was very successful. Kickstarter for Monsters Unleashed, very successful. So we talked to him about all of that, plus Shakespeare Unleashed, which was horror stories based on Shakespeare. And then he did Dead Detective Society, which is another collection, Dead Jack and other dead or supernatural detectives. But currently, he won tons of awards, Stoker and that stuff, for the 50th anniversary of Kolchak the Night Stalker. He did a comic anthology that was just a huge success on nope, that's not that is it. That is, that's one version of it.
Wow.
It's his 50th anniversary right there. And that did a killing on Kickstarter and then a killing when it got published. It won Bram Stoker Awards, Hugo Houghton Awards, Imagine Awards. It really did fantastic work and helped him open up Monstrous Books, which is his imprint. And now Monstrous has license for Kolchak the Night Stalker, and they just finished another fantastically successful Kickstarter to completely restore the Night Stalker, Kolchak's first novel from Jeff Rice.
Jeff Rice, yeah.
And this version and some of the other versions out there have typos and stuff missing, and he's worked with Tell the Damn Story friend James Chambers as an editor to restore it all.
James Aquilone worked with James Chambers.
Yeah, there's Jameses everywhere. It's like the James Gang. That's what it is.
Night of the Jameses.
Yes. And this is it promises to be the best version of that classic, beloved introduction of one of the more popular characters in that genre. You and I both grew up watching the movie of the week, right? The Night Stalker, The Night Strangler, and the sadly just one season of the TV show. Darren McGavin doing an iconic job. So we get to talk to James about all of that in the next episode.
That's right.
And at the end of that episode, he talks to us at length about the do's and don'ts of Kickstarter. Many of you who are out there have looked at Kickstarter and said, oh my God, that's horrifying. It's so scary. It's so intimidating. Listen to James and you'll learn a bunch of stuff. Yeah. So come see this next episode. But
that's not what we're here tonight to talk about.
They're saying, we've been here 5 minutes. What are you going to talk about tonight?
Yes.
Today, this afternoon, whenever you're watching, ladies and gentlemen.
And wherever you're listening to this or watching this in the world, because we know we have folks a few places on the planet. This night, we talk about influences and inspirations. A lot of the things that, at least in terms of Chris and I, influenced and inspired us to do some of the work that we've done over the years, just the way many of the people we just spoke about were influenced and inspired to do theirs. This is about supporting you out there so that you understand that some of the things that you've read, some of the movies you've seen, some of the music you've heard, some of the dances that you've watched, any of those things that have moved you, even the life experiences that you've had, they've moved you or inspired you to do some writing, to create something. That's legit. And we're going to just talk a little bit about how we've gone through that to support you.
To quote the great New Jersey sage, Bruce Springsteen, you can't start a fire without a spark.
There you go.
Even if it's just dancing in the dark. And many of the books I'm going to talk about today, I definitely did read in the dark with a little flashlight because I was supposed to be asleep. And that's what it is. Every creative, whatever your personal creative bent is, it started somewhere. And to understand yourself as a creator and to understand your work, sometimes it is worthwhile going back and saying, what were the first things that made me want to write? For example.
Hang on, before you do that, just understand also, folks, that as you enjoy the next minutes with us on this, you hang around till the end, I will share one of my greatest influences and what that brought into my life. And I suspect Chris, once he unfreezes, will do the same. So hang around for the end. Go ahead, Chris.
All right. So,
yes,
I've spoken about this often on the show, so it'll only be a quick one. This is actually the original copy. I've only ever owned this one copy, and it is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This was the first spark for me. I can't tell you why this book lit me up. I guess I was a blue-collar kid, working class community, and The Outsiders were definitely those kind of people. And I think I read it in 7th grade, ran right out, got a notebook and a pen, and wrote my first novel, which was a complete plagiarism of The Outsiders. Never saw the light of day. But some of the influences, it more left field, and one of them was
I'm gonna try and share one right now.
Oh, we're going back and forth? I'm sorry.
No, not share one of mine. I had it a moment ago. I thought I had it all worked out, how I could share yours. Remember? Because, there we go. There we go. Because Chris was nice enough to take a photograph of some of the books that were major influences in his life. So as you're talking about it, I just wanted to share the image.
There they are. Okay, they're not in that order, but so one it was just on the shelf. Maybe my older brother had to read it for school or something, but it was James Thurber, My Life and Hard Times. And as a kid, I picked it up and I read it. I was too young to understand Thurber. Thurber was a New Yorker writer, but I found these hysterical. And his drawings were even funnier. And that absurdist always includes some humor part of what I try to do. I think it came from James Thurber. Not on his level. I'm more of a kind of a middle brow. He's very highbrow, but there you go. Believe it or not, Steranko really influenced me with this Fiction Illustrated. It was the only one that he ever put out, Chandler. It's a tiny little digest size graphic novel. It was the first time I read a novel as a comic book, but it was hard boiled. And then when I explained that to my father, he said, go read The Big Sleep, go read The Maltese Falcon and all. And it opened up all that stuff for me. we've talked many a time about me going to EJ Corvettes in the Bronx for records, and along the outside wall of that little record department in that big department store was paperbacks. And we found a couple of things there. The first thing I found, and this again is the one that I bought from Corvettes, is Conan. And these were all reprints. This was a mix. It was some Robert E. Howard, L. Sprague de Camp, and Lynn Carter. But holy crap, I discovered Sword and Sorcery right there in E.J. Corvettes, Conan the Barbarian, right there between records and girdles. But further, future additional trips to Corvettes got me The Shadow and Doc Savage. These were all pulps. And when I brought these home, my father again lit up and he said, okay, listen, I read these as a kid. And then there was a station that was rebroadcasting the Shadow Radio Show and Green Hornet and all. So I got to learn audio storytelling as well as these pulps and get a bonding link with my father. So God bless it. A weird nonfiction sidestep was The Complete Story of the Man of Bronze, America's Supreme Superhero, Doc Savage, His Apocalyptic Life by Philip Jose Farmer. And this was a nonfiction summary of Doc's whole career as if he actually lived. And it just fired my imagination. The idea of playing with the form. And it's still paying off in Soulscream because I'm playing with that form. So that was a big influence. 3 others, and they're divergent. It turns out this guy actually had some Bronx ties, but I didn't know that when I was reading it. I just knew that this was the kind of book I wanted to write. The Pope of Greenwich Village. It was street guys, neighborhood guys, having to take care of something or whatever. And I think City of Woe and City of Pain, Mallory and Gunner, definitely you can see the influence from Vincent Patrick, from Dennis Lehane, from Richard Price in those. Am I as good as those guys? I would never say that, but they definitely influenced. All right, 2 more. Alex, you know that I spent a bunch of time as a journalist. One of the influences there, and one of the influences with all these books, was my friend Roger, who would assign me different things. And he turned me on to this guy, and I rarely went into his style of reporting, because once you see him, those of you who know will know that most papers would not print his style. But I picked up this book, The Gonzo Papers, Volume 1, Strange Tales from a Strange Time, The Great Shark Hunt, Hunter S. Thompson, one of the wildest journalists ever. They said he'd get all the facts wrong and all the details right. He would write more truth, but he would miss if something happened on a Thursday. He might say it's happened on a Tuesday, but the truth of it and the truth of the humanity in the stories, he always nailed. And he was never afraid to be intelligent in his wild writing. It was very different when I was reading it from the high school literature I was reading or the essays I was writing. And it really started me, all right, there's more to this writing thing. And the last one, it probably won't make any sense to people, but there was a book when we were kids, or I was a kid, you were probably in your 40s or 50s.
I was already working, yeah.
Yeah, in the 70s, by a guy named Richard Bach, and it was called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Never did anything for me. But he had a book after that, and I don't know why I read it. But it was called Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. And in essence, this book was about a book that when the protagonist opened it, wherever he opened it, he would find exactly what he needed to read. And so it was a little bit of wisdom, a little bit of spirituality, and that idea of the magic of words and the power of spirituality in characters stayed with me. and again, is reflected in the Soul Scream stories I write. So there's a quick trip through some of the seminal things that weren't the literature we were assigned to read, right? This was all outside reading that I stumbled across. But I don't think I would have done any of the things that I've done without them. And you should ask yourselves, each of you should ask yourselves, what would those be for me? For example, I'm going to ask Alex, what would those things be for you?
What were those things for me? It's funny because Chris and I have had this conversation both privately and on several episodes about how the arts influence or come into or stimulate the lives of different people. Whereas Chris, we both read comic books, but Chris was more the book hound. I was more the film hound and the TV show hound. And get me in front of a TV set and I'm locked in throughout most of my young life. I did read. I did do that. I could and I did, but it was reluctant. I sometimes wouldn't go near a library for 10, oh, not for 10, but for 2, 3 months. You couldn't get me there unless I was being dragged. And then suddenly I would go and I would grab 3 or 4 books and I'd swallow them whole. And it was just strange. It's like I gorged on them and then you couldn't get me near them. But I was always reading comic books. And I never quite figured out what that was about, but that was the way my head worked. But it was also always films, get me into a movie theater, or get me in front of the TV set for certain things. And what I discovered over a time period was I had a hero complex or a hero fascination. I loved anything where someone stood up to the bad guys or someone helped out people who were in trouble, whether it was with a partner or without, whether they were in a costume or not, whether they were a private detective or superhero. I loved that thing. I was drawn to that thing very strongly. One could assume that, especially coming up in the time period that I did, most of those heroes were male. One could assume that because my father wasn't in my life, that might have been me hunting for a male role model of some sort. One could assume that. Although I also watched shows like Annie Oakley and in the TV show, the British TV show, The Avengers, which has nothing to do with superheroes, that was in the late 60s. There was Mrs. Peel, and she was so I was not.
That's a whole different episode.
Yeah, that's true, but I enjoyed all of them. So it was not like this thing, oh, women are the weaker sex. That didn't compute with me. So there were certain females that I watched or looked at and saw them as heroic figures as well. But again, a lot of the things that influenced me were the people who would step up, take responsibility, would step up and try and right a wrong. And I'm going to pop up the image of some of the books that I did read at that time because I did it with Chris, so I can do it. I can do it for myself here. Now, where is it? Just as I thought, hang on there. I know I had it here a moment ago. Oh, there it is. There it is. So then we just go here and we go here. And this is so much easier when you do it in post-production. But here's a sort of a peek at some of the things that Sherlock Holmes on the bottom line. I read a lot of Sherlock Holmes because, like I said, I like detectives. I like people who stepped up. I did read real stories about real people. And Frederick Douglass was one of those people that I read. Martin Luther King, obviously, at that time as well. But this was a book that I don't even remember how it came into my hands. But I remember going through it and being fascinated by this character who, because at the time I was watching television and I was watching movies, and except for what came in the late 60s, early 70s in terms of black exploitation films, where, okay, black men or black people could step forth and command the territory they were in and stand up and act out against oppressive forces and all that sort of thing. Up until this time, up until that time, a lot of the images we were seeing we were servants, we were shoe shines, we were comic relief. And it wasn't about standing up and making bold statements and facing down scenarios. Matter of fact, it wasn't until, in terms of major television, it wasn't until the TV series, the miniseries Roots aired, that we saw a plethora of that. So very interesting. So for me, the Frederick Douglass was compelling. Then again, back to the entertainment pieces that I read. There's a buddy of mine who introduced me, I think it was about 17, 18. introduced me to the Ed McBain, the 87th precinct,
87th precinct, sure.
Which was another way of looking at police procedural stories with an ongoing cast of detectives who had different life situations. We weren't just on cases with them. We got to know what it was like in terms of their home life, their marriage. There was Maya, who was Jewish, which again, you didn't see a lot of that. There were usually Jewish people in stories at that time were tailors, and they had bakeries and things like that. So this was another sort of, a whole nother side of being able to look at life.
Yeah.
The Wheel of Death was the spider. This is a 1940s pulp character. No, I'm not talking about reading these during the 1940s. These are reprints that I got my hands on, just like Chris got reprints of Doc
Shadow and Tuck.
So the Wheel of Death the spider was like the Shadow. He didn't have the same capabilities, but he was also this mysterious figure, masked, 2 guns, all that, and taking on the underworld, the criminal czar underworld, as well as the maniacal threats that were coming back. And again, if I look at what was happening in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, true, World War II was already behind us, but Korea had just ended in the late 50s, early 60s. Vietnam had reared its head. There was always this thing, ever since I was a little kid, there was always these concerns, these exercises, the public service announcements about if someone presses the button and the bombs are coming, the atomic bombs are coming, you can duck your head under the table and you'll be fine. You'll be fine. And an atomic bomb goes off. Just get under the table, tuck your head between your knees, and you'll be fine. So there was a sense of not having a whole lot of power to affect the threats that were coming at us, the possibilities of dying because some maniacal individual or because of some political situation, or certainly, again, in terms of being a man of color, a social injustice. So to have a character who, a vigilante for all intents and purposes, stepped in and said, hell no, and took care of business, was fascinating to read. The spider, again, I got the spider here. I also was reading The Shadow at that time, and like Chris, and again, another character who said, there's a right and there's a wrong. And I will not only battle against evil, I will help certain people who are caught in the web of evil. And as I save their life or help them out, I'm going to have them owe me some sort of favor that I'm going to call upon. And if they really want to get involved, they will also work with me as my agents. So again, you're building this pool of regular people who can, with this master crime fighter, actually affect and stop terror and death and criminal activities. And again, just the whole thing of that fascinating possibility of being able to affect the negative things that were coming at us, to right wrongs, to make things better. It just, like I said, hero figure. And as a kid who was one of my favorite characters from fiction was the Lone Ranger in Tonto, these were just extensions of that. They weren't in the West. They were in urban cities and scenarios. The Hardy Boys. These were books that had been around since the 1920s and 30s. The Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew. These are stories that had been written for decades before I ever discovered them. The 2 in this photograph here, though, are actually 2 that I wrote. The fun thing there, although you won't see my name on these books because that's what's called ghost writing. So you do the writing, but there's another name that's going to appear on the cover. And I'm cool with that. I got paid. But it was fun to have been able to read these things as a kid, to see the Walt Disney mini series of them as I was growing up, to all of that in my life as I was growing up, and then to one day be in the position to add a story or 2 to the canon was really exciting. To be able to take those characters that I had lived with in a different way and then actually influence the volume of cases that they had taken on was a very thrilling situation for me. One that I also got to experience with Sherlock Holmes when I wrote a play with Sherlock Holmes, which again, and this goes back to what Chris and I are saying about how these things that can influence us and inspire us, we can also turn around and affect. So as a man of color, understanding Black history to a certain degree, finding out about certain characters who existed back in the past around the same time as Sherlock Holmes, the fictional character, I found a way to blend those two curious and fascinating aspects of my life at that time. And so I wrote a fictional play about Sherlock Holmes, helping the family of a real life actor at that time, a Black actor from the United States named Ira Aldridge. And so I was able to reveal his existence and what happened to his family after he passed, and this mystery that was involved. I was able to reveal truth at the same time I was wrapping it up in a fictitious world, in a fictitious situation. So these were the things that really, to this day, I've written Archie and some other things, Batman, Tarzan. These are characters that I grew up watching, reading, experiencing in one way, shape, or form, who I later had an opportunity to influence the stories that people will come to know them by. And it's a funny feeling when you realize that you now have these characters in your hands, and part of the trick is to respect the source material, but to find out what you can bring to the table that wasn't there before.
Yeah, definitely. A note for those interested and curious about Alex's Sherlock Holmes in the Hands of Othello. That's the name of that play. We here on this side of the screen at Seamus and Nunzio Productions are working on a printed version of that play so that all of you Sherlock Holmesians can enjoy what Alex did with the character and with Ira Aldridge in Sherlock Holmes in the Hands of Othello. And that should be coming out. I'm hoping to get it out by the end of 2024, but we'll see.
You're going to do a wonderful job either way. So if it comes out at the end of this year, great. If it comes out at the beginning of next year, that's also great.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
The appetite sparks the creativity. There is a lot of overlap, as you see from Alex, from your pile. The only thing I hadn't read was The Spider. For some reason, I never came across it. But Sherlock Holmes, definitely. The Life and Times of Frederick Douglass, I think that was assigned, but there was something about that book that it just pulsed, the narrative pulsed with life, where some of the other nonfiction stuff we were handed was more dusty. So that's to put it delicately. And the Hardy Boys, do you remember the old blue hardcover? Right? There was like a half a shelf of them in my room, and it was three brothers in a room. So I always assumed they came when Barney's reading or something like that. But yeah, I went through them. I knew of Nancy Drew, but there were none of those books around the house. So I never got that joy to read her.
It's a funny thing because William Stratemeyer, the publisher, creator of the Hardy Boys series, had published them for a long time. And I think Simon & Schuster then picked up the rights to them. But there was a point, and I wish I could remember the name of the publisher. There was a point where there was another publishing house that had rights to reprint the early books. And so they put them in those blue backings that you're talking about. But they also, much like you were saying with the Jeff Rice Night Stalker, they snipped at it. They took out stuff. Now, I'm not sure if everything they took out was to make it more savvy for the population of society at that time. I bring this up because the Bobbsey Twins was another Stratemeyer series. So the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, Tom Swift, the Bobbsey Twins, these are all things created in the 1920s and 30s. And when they were written at that time, there was a different, shall we say, societal norm.
Right.
And I happen to have some original copies of the Bobbsey Twins. And they have a maid, a black maid. And I can force myself to read when she speaks, but somebody just had the best time writing the worst possible stereotypical so-called Black speech in that time period. So I do know that when they were doing the Hardys, they sometimes edited them to remove stuff that, again, was not necessarily socially acceptable in the 60s or 50s, 60s. But like I said, I wish I could remember the name of the publisher who did that.
So I can trace back where all this stuff came from. Even the Ed McBain 87th Precinct, that was my introduction to police procedurals. So when I was doing the Mallory and Gunner, tapped into my inner Ed McBain and then cop friends to correct what details I was getting wrong. But I hope that people can see through lines. We used each other as examples or our reading as examples because we work cheap, but it could have been anybody, right? So we hope that it's a good exercise. Well, what is it what started me, and what do I still see in my creativity? Whatever yours is, whether it's screenplays or poems or fiction or nonfiction or art of
Painting,
whatever. Go and check back to your roots and let us know in comments. Here's what I did. Here's what and it would be really cool to hear from you.
Yeah.
We hope this was helpful.
Hang on, we got two things. Because
we have two things.
We promised them something. We promised them something.
We did promise.
So one, let me just add a little juicy little tidbit. Ed McBain was the pen name of a novelist of great fame at that time by the name of Evan Hunter, who wrote The Blackboard Jungle and Mr. Budwing and some other things that were more recognized on a quote unquote adult mainstream level. And the 87th Precinct was like paperback enjoyment that you could get and read on the job, the kind of thing. So just understand that there are different levels of the creative experience that you can play depending on how you want to approach your career. So that was one.
I would say that Evan Hunter always said that he couldn't escape Ed McBain because the 87th Precinct that series had such a loyal following.
Yeah.
He couldn't turn it from a business standpoint. He couldn't turn his back on him. He wanted to be as loved, shall we say, or as famous. Writers never get famous. There's one that I know, maybe two, right? Oh, those guys are famous. The rest of us are but except for Blackboard Jungle, his other work is a little overshadowed by Ed McBain legacy, which just for a little trivia.
Right. And then I said that we would, pardon me, we would share something significant in terms of some key, at least for me, some key thing that came out of my experiencing the works of an author through their books. And then it made some sort of a major influence in my life. So I've told the story already about Ray Bradbury and Something Wicked Comes. And if you don't know that story, folks, listen to the other episodes. We'll get that one. But I will say this one, getting very personal here. At a point in my life when my marriage had ended and I was really devastated. There are people who celebrate that sort of thing and they're happy to be quote unquote free. I was not. And it was really a difficult time for me. And I was pretty much at a low ebb. And I came across, again, thank the higher realms for mystery and detective stories, because I came across a book by Lawrence Saunders called The 10th Commandment. And it's a mystery story. It's set apart from some of the other series that he had done, some of the other novels that he'd done. And it was a story about this nebbish little man who's very short. And he's been short, obviously, all his life. He grew up that way. And he found a way to cope with life, being short and demure and demeanor, rather, and all that. And he gets a job at this bizarre law firm on the Upper East Side of Manhattan as a mailroom clerk. He's even too old for the job because he's in his mid to late 20s. And it really is for a teenager, but he gets the job. And there's an old ex-police detective who's the detective for the firm now. He's an old guy. He's on his way out. He wants to retire. He drinks too much, but he likes this little guy. And he decides, look, when I retire, they're going to need somebody else to take over this job. If I'll put you through hell, I'll train you. But if you stick to it, this job will be yours. Now, that's not the novel. That's the beginning of the story.
Right.
This little guy does. He runs errands for this guy. He screws up tailing people. He screws up a bunch of different jobs that he's assigned to, but he sticks to it and eventually winds up with the gig. And once he has the gig, two major cases come up for these attorneys, and they're murder cases. And he suddenly is caught in the middle of all this. And again, he's not tough. He's not trained in the martial arts or anything. He's got to make his way through this with overwhelming physical concerns to deal with, wealthy individuals who have influence and power and all this. And as I'm reading this, I am so identifying with this guy because I felt like that. I felt small and insignificant and powerless. And watching him maneuver through this thing and fumbling and getting back up and finding affection at some point, and just not to give away the whole book. And of course, the book is, I don't know, what, 35 years ago was written or whatever. So if you haven't read it and you don't want to read it, that's another thing. But if you want to read it, go find it, The 10th Commandment. But that book got me through that difficult time. And I'm sure Saunders was not thinking about some guy in the middle of New York City, blah, 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 at going through what I was going through. But it connected with me. It resonated with me. It helped me. I literally read that cover to cover in 3 or 4 days. It was almost all I did.
Yeah.
Was eat, sleep, and read.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the reasons Tell the Damn Story is over 300 and we're approaching 320, 325 episodes, and we still want to talk about it because stories have saved our lives again and again. And we're sure anyone who's still watching this show, that's because stories have saved your life too.
Yeah, there you go.
And that idea of maybe I can write something that could help somebody else, that gets a lot of butts in seats and fingers on keyboards. And we encourage you to do the same, because maybe the life you save is your own, but maybe it's somebody that you will never meet.
There you go.
And that's why we tell the damn story. Bam.
Chris, it's a pleasure.
Always an honor, sir. Always an honor.
Same. Everybody, thank you for being here. Be back next week. Remember, we have our next episode is with James Aquilone, and you'll hear
fascinating.
Fascinating. Really wonderful information about the books he's writing, but also the Kickstarter campaign that made it possible, and the publishing empire that he's now building.
Little by little,
talent and his Kickstarter capabilities.
Yeah.
All right.
And
yes,
remember, it's a Soul Scream summer. The prices are ridiculous.
Yes.
Go and get some, read it, enjoy it, and then you see a nephew or niece who's bored, bam.
You can give it to your grandparents and your aunts.
Anybody.
Anybody can read
we have a dog around here who he likes one of the books. So
there you go. Chris, what do you tell people to do?
I tell people to bang on that like button and subscribe so you don't miss a minute of this riveting duo who are bringing you Tell the Damn Story.
Take care, everybody.
Chris Ryan. We'll be back next week to rivet you again.
That's right, rivet. Bye-bye.
Peace.